Welcome to Ewheels. My name is Martin Lee from the channel. You may have seen me on some of the videos. My buddy here in Italy, Flavio, has got himself a Mazda MX30 and has sent us this video to point out some of the design elements, what it's like to drive around Italian streets as well. So I'll bring you the info. He is showing us the car right now. Nice little point of view video. He says that when you look at the car, you can see that it is a full EV, so the battery pack is underneath the car. But what he likes about the styling here, he was saying, was that the rear end of the car has that coupe shape, and so although it's a SUV crossover, slightly higher segment car, when you look at the back, it's got that slope down, which gives it a more dynamic appeal and a more dynamic presence, and he liked the way that that looked on the Italian streets as he was driving it around on this test drive day. He's going to show us the front of the car in just a moment and have a look around at some of the design elements of the Mazda engineers of their first full production EV, at least. And he says here, you've got that nice slim grille that really stood out to him. He liked this with the two lights either side, again quite slim, quite a common design element on lots of electric vehicles, but that straight line across the bonnet just above the Mazda emblem there, but a very small grille. But if you look down, you can see where the air intake is here, and he was pointing out that yes, the grille is closed off, but the air needs to go in, cool the battery under there for not only the battery but the various EV ancillary systems. But coming around the side again, he was a real fan actually of the styling on these Italian streets. It really fits in quite well. The length of the car made it pretty dynamic, and the black trim around the wheel arches gives it that SUV crossover shape and style. Good length, good dimensions of the car, he was pointing out. But there is a party trick when you get a little bit closer to the car, and that is, if you've seen the BMW i3, this. Yes, open one door and open another door. Some call them suicide doors, an unfortunate phrase in the motoring industry. That is the party trick of this car, though, and we're going to get a little bit closer and have a look at the Mazda MX30 and some of the highlights of this. Of course, it charges on CCS, but incredibly slowly. Some of the cars in its class will charge quicker. You've got the Type 2 above, there you can see, and then the DC sockets beneath for the DC fast charging. Nice design elements around the back, these circular lights and nice little design tweaks and touches. The Mazda engineers doing a great little job, he says, around the back of the car when you see this vehicle in person to give it some standout presence. But we're going to have a look inside first of all. Flavio's just around 6 foot tall, and so about 1.8 meters to have a look in the back. Okay, here we go. He's opening the driver's door. Of course, left-hand drive car. He's in Italy, and he says then you open the rear door, and that is impressive. It's a bit of a party trick. It looks good, but when you look in the rear, it already looks a little bit small, he says, and he's a little bit worried about getting in the knee room. And then down here, he was pointing out, I hadn't realized this of the Mazda MX-30, it's a little bit awkward to get in. There's a step in there, because obviously that's where the door closes, but he's going to climb in now. Little head cam on to have a look in the back, and he did point out that the immediate reaction when he got in was it's pretty dark, it's pretty dingy, you feel very closed in, not a lot of light in this car. There is a sunroof in the front, but the fabrics, the actual quality, lifting down the center armrest here, we've got two cup holders in the middle, and just touching all of the kind of the tactile bits of this car. The fabric, the stitching, the quality of the materials, a lot of recycled PET plastic bottles in here as well, lots of cork up front, we'll show you in a minute, but actually in the back, it's okay. A little bit of knee room, but the driver's seat is pushed forward at the moment. Very small range on this car, which we'll get to in a moment. He says that the actual foot room as well underneath the driver's seat is a little bit limited, and also he felt cramped. And like I say, he's about 1.8 meters tall. If you do sit in the middle, you've got that tunnel running through the middle of the car like the combustion version, so it's not ideal. But there is a bit of a party trick on the back of the driver's seat, and that is that the rear passengers can move the seat backwards, forwards, like he's doing right now, and actually slide the seat backwards, push the up button, it moves forwards to give you more legroom. I'm not sure how my kids in the back of the car would be playing with that function. I have to tell them not to touch it, but it's a nice design quirk, and it works pretty well. He says in the back of the car, you could do short journeys with 5 adults in the back, but you wouldn't really want to. He says he's looking at the sunroof here, which lets a little bit of light in, but still not really enough. Could do with a full panoramic roof in this Mazda MX-30. You're going to get in the front and have a look at what it's like from the perspective of the driver and the passenger up the front. So here he is, Flavio's in the front now, and having a look. He says the first design element that springs to mind is that steering wheel, which is classy, well designed. Good size, sits nicely. That nice design of the Mazda steering wheel with those tactile buttons on either side to give you access to drive modes as well. He liked that, and he likes the feeling of those buttons. Of course, some EVs have gone with the capacitive buttons, but he says they've got a nice touch to them, nice feedback, nice feel, and he really, really liked the steering wheel, the Mazda MX-30. Thought it was really nice to drive around these Italian streets, which we'll see him doing in just a moment. Behind the steering wheel is behind these buttons of controlling the infotainment and the radio and the music and things like that. There are the paddles behind the screens, he says. So when you get to driving the regen functions, you can use those paddles. Having a look at the screens, we've got the physical control here for managing the infotainment screen with the physical buttons around it. He says that's a nice way of working through the systems. We've got two screens in this car, the infotainment system up top, which he's playing with right now, and says it's pretty responsive, quite snappy, quite quick. Not the best designed, of course, comparing it to some EVs that have large tablet-like displays in the cars, but he really liked how quick it was to use the infotainment displays. Gear selector, very traditional gear selector, and then in front of that, he says the climate system here has two methods of operating it. So he liked either side. Here he's pointing out the tactile buttons of the Mazda MX-30. He really liked those, and he says it's good to be able to use the touchscreen, if you want to use the touchscreen, to do those functions, but also if you're driving and you just want to feel your way down from the steering wheel here, you can do that. Behind the steering wheel, conventional display with the speed, the revs, if you like, here on the left-hand side he's pointing out, but that's power and regen, which is blended with the braking. We'll get onto that. And a traditional kind of energy meter like the fuel, he says here. Very traditional kind of display in the Mazda MX-30. So if you're coming from a combustion car, he pointed out, it would feel like you're very much at home in this car. Gear selector, fuel, display, everything would feel very much at home, but feeling nice inside this car. He likes the little cork elements, of course, the throwback to Mazda's history there in terms of what they used to produce. And he says everything in this car, when you look around it here, you look at the screens, touching the dashboard, touching the various materials, he says it feels like quality. Now, it's not a cheap EV, it's around 30,000 euros or pounds, but things like this, like the cork material down here, where you're going to put your phone or your keys and change and things like that, these little design elements, he said really give it a feeling of premium. Of course, again, it's not a cheap car, but all these little touches he really liked to play with and to touch and to get involved with the car. So we have two USB sockets in here if you are using the car for charging your devices or maybe even working. Got your 12-volt behind that, so you can, in the cigarette lighter, plug the 12-volt socket in, but two USB-C plugs tucked under here as well. Nicely out of the way. That could be a little inconvenient to charge your devices, but of course they will provide a good amount of power to charge up your phone or your tablet if you are working remotely. More design elements in the door trim here which stood out to him, and again, lots of great quality materials everywhere he looked. You just want to touch those materials, he said, and appreciate the good quality of the Mazda MX-30. Lots of recycled materials in the car, as I've pointed out already, and these are some specs which come as standard on all of the cars as well, and all of the various trims. Now we're going to take a drive on the Italian streets, the windy streets, in just a second, to see what the driving dynamics are like of the Mazda MX-30. So here we are, Flavio's behind the wheel, and he sent me a few minutes of him driving around these tight, twisty streets. And he pointed out to me, he said, look, you've got to tell the audience how good this car is for these kind of roads. Now, it's a small battery. He was saying as you're driving around, you can feel that weight of the 35.5 kilowatt-hour battery underneath you. He said it's definitely there. Of course, a car with an MX designation like the MX-5, he was saying as you're driving around these bumpy, twisty, tiny streets, an MX-5 would feel quicker than it really is. It would be sporty, it would be dynamic, but the MX-30 definitely feels the weight that it is in terms of that battery pack. Being low down, which is good for stability. Off the line here, he says the acceleration is good, if not that instant burst of torque that you get from EVs. So as you're pulling away from junctions, or here we're coming down to a stop, using that blended regen braking on the brake pedal, rather than having hard regen down to 0 miles an hour, one pedal driving it's sometimes called. He said that instant torque is nice, but it's smooth. He's pointing out as he's driving around these streets, everything feels very composed, very easy to drive, but a very smooth torque power delivery. Now, some EVs give you that instant hit, that punch. He says some of the cars that we've driven on Ewheels give you that real kind of shot of EV torque power. You don't get it in this, but it's a smooth power delivery, which he liked. Now, he's also pointing out, he told me to tell you about the regen braking here, which when you put your foot on the brake pedal, you see the power meter moving up for accelerating, but also when you decelerate and put your foot on the brake pedal, you see that power meter on the left-hand side there, which just went down. It's blended braking, and so you won't get down to 0 miles an hour, but there are several levels of regen on this, which, with using the paddles behind the steering wheel you can use as well, will mean that as you are driving around, a lot of energy is recuperated if you use it in the right way. So you slow down a little bit in advance, but use that brake pedal as well. Just put your foot gently on it and start to slow down, and the regen will take care of slowing the car. These paddles behind the wheel now, as he's pointing out, are how you change the levels of regen. So you can go from 0 regen, you're saying, and the coasting is nice, but also you can put it to the top level of regen where it'll slow you down. If you let this accelerate as he just did, it will slow you down, but not to 0, so not true one pedal driving. But he says that doesn't really matter in a car like this. Of course, the Nissan Leaf will have its e-pedal, and other EVs as well will go down to 0 mile an hour. But in a kind of D mode here on the very traditional looking gear stick, you can, with D mode, have that maximum regen, take you down to just a few miles an hour, and that's about as much as the regen will do. But he says it all makes for a very smooth driving experience. The overwhelming experience of driving this is not a performance car, not something that you'll throw around the twisty, turny back roads at a high speed, but for driving around these Italian streets as we're looking right now, he says it's an absolutely perfect little car. What about the range? Well, he was telling me on his test drive, about 170 or 180 kilometers real world, which is surprising because it's got 124 miles WLTP test cycle range. That's about 199 kilometers on the official test cycle. Now, driving around as he did today and these twisty turny streets, he said he would expect to get a little bit more, but he was getting around 170 or 180 kilometers real world range. And the car feels very much like a combustion car that is electric. So if you are coming across from a combustion version, or you don't want all the bells and whistles of EV driving, you want a car that looks quite conventional, drives quite conventional, this would be a choice for you. So he was impressed with the styling of the Mazda MX30 on his day test driving it, and wanted me to point out the pros and cons of the car from his impression. His 3 things he didn't like so much was the small battery. It should be, he says, a bit bigger in an EV in 2021. Mazda pointing out it keeps the CO2 emissions over the life of the car low. That's their point. Second point, he says, is that it hasn't got the most performance for a car with the MX badge. And thirdly, he wasn't very keen on the space in the back. But things he liked, he said, I really did like how the car was smooth to drive around, how the regen blending on the brake pedal works very well, and also the styling of the car was something that stood out with this two-tone roof and this paint job. Leave us a note in the comments below if you like or dislike the Mazda MX30, and we'll keep the conversation going. Hit the thumbs up button and we'll know you like this video, and we'll make more like it.